Greetings and welcome. We are in Senior English B. And now our objective is to introduce you to one of the great English poets of the Victorian era, Alfred Lord Tennyson. Now I'm with you on your in your hymnal on page 959, and I'm aware that you've already done some work in terms of reading of biography. If you'll take a look on 959 real quickly, for sure you want to write down this cat's years. Notice 1809 to 1892 means he pretty much lives all of what century? All of what century? Right, the 19th century, doesn't he? So he saw a lot, and he was acutely aware of the effects of the Industrial Revolution, as we talked about it with that shoe factory story and all of that. However, today we're not going to spend much time talking about Tennyson's response to the Industrial Revolution, but rather Tennyson's response to tremendous grieving. What does it mean to grieve? What does that mean? To be really sad about the passing of someone or something? To be really upset? And for us, we want to make the observation that Tennyson lost Arthur Henry Hellman. Hellman was a dear friend of Tennyson's through marriage, and he dies at the age of 22. So Hellman dies at a very, very young age. And I think it's important for your notes to say Tennyson was unprepared for the passing of his closest friend. I think maybe one of the ways to wrap your brain around this is to imagine losing unexpectedly the one person in your life you care the most about, and then having to come to terms with that loss. The way Tennyson comes to terms with that loss is in writing a series of poems that he called In Memoriam. Okay, there it is on page 960, In Memoriam. And he wrote a number of these poems. We're only going to look at 4 of them. He numbered them, okay? He numbered them, so you can see the numberings of 17, 82, and finally on page 962, 130. And we're going to look at each one of these very quickly and identify what is it that Tennyson is saying about death, dying, and the grieving process of going through the loss of someone that you care very much for. We're going to begin on number 1, okay, on poem 1. So I'm with you now on 960. Let's read together. I held it truth with him who sings to one clear harp in divers tones, that men may rise on stepping stones of their dead selves to higher things. But who shall so forecast the years and find in loss a gain to match, or reach a hand through time to catch the far-off interest of tears? Let love clasp grief, lest both be drowned. Let darkness keep her raven gloss. Ah, sweeter to be drunk with loss, to dance with death, to beat the ground, than that the victor hours should scorn the long result of love and boast. Behold the man that loved and lost, for all he was is overworn. Now I want to pay attention to some lines that are not provided for you in your anthology, but Tennyson famously said this, and you've probably heard this line, but you're going to want to write it in your notes. In Memoriam, Tennyson says this about losing someone you love. 'Tis better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. This is an interesting idea, and you might want to write it down. I'll say it again. It's better to have loved and lost than ever to have loved, never to have loved at all. In other words, even though loving someone means sometimes losing that someone, Tennyson says it's better to have gone through that experience, right, and to have lost the someone, than to have never experienced love. Now, let's point out, lots of times these poems get quoted in romantic love, but we're talking about love between 2 friends, okay? That's the love that we're speaking of, friendship love, comradeship, and the like. Jot down from poem 1. Jot down, what do you think that final stanza means again? He says, Let darkness keep her raven gloss, sweeter to be drunk with loss, to dance with death, to beat the ground, than that the victor hours should scorn the long result of love and boast. Quote, behold the man that loved and lost, for all he was is overgrown. In other words, you have an option, he says. One, you can be really sad about the passing of someone. You can see their grave as covered, overgrown by grass. Or you can remember what they were when they were alive, right? And to that degree, they are somehow still held in your heart, if you will. Chapter 3b, real quickly. Do you agree or disagree with the idea it's better to have had a relationship that you would qualify as love and it to end really badly? Do you agree with that? It's better to have had the experience, even though it ended badly, than to never had the experience at all and not have to go through the pain of it. Jot down in 3b whether you agree or disagree with that idea. Do you buy that notion? It's better to have had an experience, even though the experience ended in real pain, than to have never had the experience of love. Or is it rather, as one senior said, that's the stupidest idea I ever heard. It's a whole lot better to never fall in love and have your heart broken, because then you don't have to have the pain of it.
Was that a girl that said that?
That's interesting you would ask it that way. Let's take a look at passage 7, poem 7. Read it with me. I'm on 961. Dark house, by which once more I stand here in the long, unlovely street. Doors where my heart was used to beat so quickly, waiting for a hand that can be clasped no more. Behold me, for I cannot sleep, and like a guilty thing I creep at earliest morning to the door. He's not here, but far away the noise of life begins again, and ghastly through the drizzling rain on the bald street breaks the blank day. Wow, what do you want to say about this poem? Jot down. This is a fairly simple, accessible poem. He loses his best pal. And he finds that when he wants to go to the place where his best pal lived, there's nobody living in the house anymore. It's over. It's done. One of the ways I've tried to help students get a sense of this, and I don't know if this works for all of you or not, but if you, for example, went to one of the 3 elementary schools in this town, and you haven't been back for a long time, if you can remember as a high school student entering one of those elementary schools and walking in, the strange feeling of being back at a place that you, all of a sudden, you can call all kinds of memories out, right, from that. But you were a different person back then. It's like the situation is now past. It's over. You can't go back to that time, even though you're standing in the same hall, the same door. Some of my students report that before they graduate, they go and find their elementary teachers and tell them thank you. If they're still teaching or they're still alive, it's a worthy compliment to say, 12 years ago I started this project, and now I'm ready to end this project. And in many ways, your early teachers were the ones that started a lot of that. But I promise, when you walk through those doors of that old classroom, you'll have a strange feeling. Now, this begs a question. In 30 years, what will it be like to come back to the home that you're living in now? What will it be like? Will people still be living there who you know? Or will other people be living in that house? This is a strange question, and we are now capturing some of this feeling of poem 7. What will it be like if no one's living in the house that you're living in now that you know in 20, 30 years, and you come back to visit? How will you experience that loss? Here we're dealing with loss. So notice, in Memoriam, we're remembering not just the person, but often the place of the person, right? Look at poem 82. I waged not any feud with death, nor changes wrought on form and face. No lower life that earth's embrace may breed with him can fright my faith. Eternal process moving on from state to state the spirit walks, and these are but the shattered stalks of ruined chrysalis of one. Nor blame I death because he bare the use of virtue out of earth. I know transplanted human worth will bloom to profit otherwhere. For this alone on death I wreak, the wrath that garners in my heart. He put our lives so far apart, we cannot hear each other speak. What do you want to say about this poem? Jot down really quickly an idea about this poem. Especially notice the opening stanza of this little one. I wage not any feud with death, for changes wrought on form and face. Put it in your own words. What's he say? What does it mean to say, I wage not a feud with death? What does that mean? Again, just write down an answer to my question. You don't have to say it out loud. Write down an answer to my question. I've had students that say, reading these poems is actually difficult for me because I've lost someone in my past, whether it be in a relationship or whether it be physically to death. And these poems bring up a lot of those memories, and that's unsettling for me. But notice what he says, I wage not any feud with death. In other words, what? Is he going to be mad at death? No, he says, I'm not. I'm not gonna be mad at death for doing what death does. No lower life that earth's embrace may breed with him can fright my faith. Just because he says I lost my best pal does not mean that I no longer have faith. Tennyson, a person of faith, will believe that still there is some reason to hope that maybe someday he'll be able to see his pal again in the afterlife or whatever. Notice he says it as much in the second stanza. Eternal process, moving on. From state to state, the Spirit walks. That is to say, the people who you live with now, who are older than you, there is a great likelihood they will pass on before you do. But that is a process, he says, that is necessary. The Spirit moves from state to state. In other words, this is natural. Death, he will argue in this poem, is a natural byproduct of life. All right, let's look at the final of these poems on page 962, poem 130. This is one of the most famous of all of his poems, a tribute to his past and dead friend. And again, some of you who have lost someone you care very much about can maybe appreciate what it is that he's going to say about what it's like to lose somebody you really care about. Passage 130. Thy voice is on the rolling air. I hear thee where the waters run. Thou standest in the rising sun, and in the setting thou art fair. What art thou then? I cannot guess. But though I seem in star and flower to feel thee some diffusive power, I do not therefore love thee less. My love involves the love before. My love is vaster passion now, though mixed with God and nature thou. I seem to love thee more and more. Far off thou art, but ever nigh. I have thee still, and I rejoice. I prosper, circled with thy voice. I shall not lose thee, though I die. Now this is an interesting poem. He says that even though, and again, I've had students that resonate with this idea, even though his pal is gone, he still can hear his pal's voice. He still can see his pal. Not literally, but in the mind's eye. Or when he's walking out in nature, for example, he can hear in the rolling of the creek, the sound of the creek or whatever, and it immediately will resurrect the memory, right? But what do you make of this final line of this poem? I shall not lose thee, though I die. What does that mean? Write down what you think that means. Again, Tennyson, a person of faith, believes what? When he dies, what? Right, his pal's standing on the other side, waiting for him. And so to that degree, he doesn't see death for himself as so fearful, because his pal is on the other side, the one he cares for on the other side. It begs a really intriguing question in 3b. Write it down. I'll let you muse on it on your own. Do you think people who believe in some kind of afterlife fear death less or more? Do you believe people who believe in some kind of afterlife. In other words, you live, you die, and then something happens to you afterwards. Heaven or hell or whatever. Do you believe that those people fear death less or more? Do they feel like they have the capacity to maybe endure the passing, their own passing, or somebody else's passing? Do you think the belief in afterlife actually helps in the whole process of death and dying? Is there any value to funerals? Is another question. Is there any value to funerals? A third question. Who is the one person in your life who this afternoon, if you lost that one person, would cause you the greatest sense of loss or grief? And if you don't have someone's name to write down, Tennyson might argue your life is less full because of that. Some argue, well, if I don't have a name to write down, that means I got nothing to worry about that somebody might go away or die on me. I don't have to endure the pain of loss. Tennyson would argue quite the opposite. Your life is not very full then. You don't love anyone that strongly if you're not going to grieve at their passing. Finally, what do you imagine would be the significance of your own passing? I asked this question once and a student was shocked at the question, but I'll ask it to you guys as well. If you were to die this evening, who would write poetry like this about you? I'm not saying literally write poetry. I mean, feel these sentiments. Have these concerns. Have these thoughts. If you were to pass away this evening, is there someone in your life who you know well enough who would say about your leaving, I'm really saddened by that departure, and I'm going to continue to remember that person? A subsidiary to this question is this question. Upon your passing, how do you wish to be remembered? What is it that you wish to be remembered for? If you were to pass this evening, what would you be remembered for? Obviously, you haven't lived very long, barely, almost now 2 decades. You haven't lived a long time, but what do you want to be remembered for if you do pass? What do you want your friends to remember you for in the process of grieving? And of course, the grieving process involves a looking backwards, as we see with Tennyson, but also a looking forwards, right? A hope, an expectation that your life has been lived well enough that people can carry your memory and live better because of it. Remember what Longfellow says in Psalm of Life about those sands of time, lives of great men all remind us we can make our lives sublime, and departing leave behind us footprints on the sands of time, footprints that perhaps another sailing a life Salome, a forlorn and shipwrecked brother seeing shall take heart again. Live in such a way that other people can emulate your life in such a way that their life is better because you've lived. Who are those people in your life? I once had a student that said, that kind of depresses me. I can't write a name down. Maybe that is a challenge, to begin to live your life in such a way that you can bond friendships that are close enough that at your passing, somebody would want to write sentiments or think sentiments like this. Well, welcome to Alfred Lord Tennyson. The poetry that we're going to look at next from Tennyson will be quite different from this poetry, but still a good introduction nonetheless, right?